The 2024 presidential campaign's home stretch kicks off with a mixed outlook across 6 key battlegrounds, according to new CNN polls conducted by SSRS in each state. Vice President Kamala Harris holds an advantage over former President Donald Trump among likely voters in Wisconsin and Michigan, while Trump has the edge in Arizona. The two split likely voters almost evenly in Georgia, Nevada, and Pennsylvania, the state with the largest electoral vote prize that's widely seen as up for grabs. Across each of them, an average of 15% of likely voters say they have not yet firmly decided their choice, suggesting a sizable share of voters could shift their views on the race as attention to the campaign rises and campaign activity, especially in these states, hits a fever pitch in the final 9 weeks before Election Day. Likely voters in Wisconsin break 50% for Harris to 44% for Trump, and in Michigan, it's 48% Harris to 43% Trump. In Arizona, Trump lands at 49% to Harris's 44%. In Georgia and Nevada, 48% back Harris to 47% for Trump, and in Pennsylvania, the candidates are tied at 47%. The polls, conducted after the Democratic National Convention in August, reflect results among likely voters determined through a combination of past vote behavior and current intention to vote. The findings suggest an electoral college landscape where Pennsylvania and Georgia are central to each candidate's path to the White House. President Joe Biden carried all 6 of these states in 2020, winning Georgia by just under 12,000 votes and Arizona by a little over 10,000 votes. Were Harris to hold Biden's 2020 wins outside of these 6 states and carry Wisconsin and Michigan, a win in Pennsylvania plus a single electoral vote from anywhere else would give her the presidency. Should Trump hold North Carolina, a state he carried in 2020 and that is widely considered a battleground in this year's contest, wins in Georgia and Pennsylvania would put him over the top regardless of what happens in Wisconsin, Michigan, or Nevada. In that scenario, even Arizona, where he currently holds a narrow lead, would not be necessary for Trump to win another term as president. Harris's emergence as the Democratic Party's presidential nominee, replacing Biden atop the party's ticket this summer, has altered some dynamics in the race but left others intact. Economic issues, which posed a notable weak point for Biden, remain the topic most often chosen by voters when asked what matters to their choice for president. An average of 39% of likely voters across states choose the economy as their top issue, with protecting democracy next at an average of 25%. But Harris now trails Trump on trust to handle the economy by relatively smaller margins than Biden did. Across the current polls, Trump is more trusted than Harris on the economy by 8 points on average. In New York Times/Siena College polls of the same 6 states this spring, the same calculation yielded a 20-point Trump advantage over Biden. Trump maintains a broad advantage as more trusted to handle immigration, while Harris has built on Biden's lead as more trusted to handle abortion and reproductive rights, with women across these 6 states preferring her by an average of 27 percentage points on the issue. Across nearly all of these states, likely voters are more apt to describe Trump than Harris as having clear policy plans to solve the country's problems. Voters split about evenly on this question in Wisconsin and Michigan, but voters in these swing states largely describe Harris's views and policies as mainstream and Trump's as too extreme. About half in each state, between 46% and 51%, say Trump's views and policies are so extreme that they pose a threat to the country, while around 4 in 10, between 37% and 42%, say the same about Harris's positions. Harris tops Trump across these states in being seen by voters as more apt to care about people like you, narrowly so in Arizona and Pennsylvania, and as someone they would be proud to have as president. Voters' views on who would bring the kind of change the country needs vary state to state and are generally closely divided. Independent voters, whose preferences in the presidential race vary widely state to state, are notably likely to say that they could change their minds about the race. Roughly a quarter of independent likely voters or more feel that way across states. And they also are more likely than other respondents to say they think neither Harris nor Trump will unite the country rather than divide it. 33% on average across states say so. That neither has clear policy plans to solve the country's problems, 31% on average. And that neither cares about people like them, 26% on average. As the sitting vice president, Harris is tied to an unpopular White House. Biden's approval rating stands in negative territory with likely voters across all 6 states, with approval around 40% in all but Wisconsin, where it stands at 44%. Still, Harris currently holds an average of 16% support among likely voters who disapprove of Biden's job as president. The last time a sitting vice president ran for the White House, in 2000, Al Gore captured just 9% of those who disapproved of President Bill Clinton's job performance nationwide. According to exit polls, both Georgia and Pennsylvania remain thoroughly up for grabs, according to the polls, with tight margins overall and double-digit shares of likely voters. 12% in Georgia and 16% in Pennsylvania, saying they haven't yet decided on a candidate or that they might change their minds. Black voters are a key bloc in both states, particularly in Georgia, and according to these polls, Harris stands at 85% among black likely voters in Georgia and at 84% in Pennsylvania. In both states, though, black registered voters express less motivation to vote in this year's election than white voters do. In Georgia, 61% of black registered voters say they are extremely motivated to vote compared with 70% among white voters, and in Pennsylvania, just 56% of black voters say they are deeply motivated to vote compared with 72% of white voters. Both states see significant gender gaps in presidential preference, with Harris ahead by double digits among female likely voters in both states, while Trump has similarly large leads among male likely voters. Harris widens her margin slightly in both states among suburban women, topping Trump by 16 points with that group in Georgia and 18 points in Pennsylvania. Harris carries a majority of likely voters younger than 35 in both states, leading 59% to 36% in Pennsylvania and 54% to 41% in Georgia. White likely voters without college degrees in both states break broadly for Trump, particularly in Georgia, where roughly 7 in 10 support him. White likely voters who do have four-year college degrees, though, split in opposite directions across the two states. In Pennsylvania, they broadly favor Harris, 59% to 37%, while in Georgia, they are solidly in Trump's camp, 65% to 32%. That dynamic is similar to the divide seen in 2020 exit polling. Harris's narrow leads in Wisconsin and Michigan are largely driven by consolidation of the Democratic base, as well as increased motivation among Democratic and Democratic-leaning likely voters, who are broadly aligned behind Harris now. 96% in Michigan and 95% in Wisconsin support her. CNN's March 2024 poll in Michigan, fielded after Trump and Biden had secured enough delegates to win their party's nominations, found only 75% of Democratic and Democratic-leaning registered voters express support for Biden. In both states, Harris's support among some key demographics of the Democratic Party's base resembles that of Biden's 2020 win. Harris leads Trump among female likely voters, 55% to 38% in Wisconsin, 54% to 38% in Michigan, white voters with college degrees, 62% to 31% in Wisconsin, 52% to 41% in Michigan, and by 86% to 11% among black likely voters in Michigan. The sample size for black likely voters is not large enough to report in Wisconsin. Younger voters here are less broadly in Harris's camp than in Georgia, Pennsylvania, or Nevada. In Michigan, voters younger than 35 split 43% for Harris and 42% for Trump. In Wisconsin, they break 49% Harris and 42% Trump. Both states were central to the uncommitted movement's efforts to log protest votes against Biden during the Democratic presidential primary, an effort focused at least in part on younger voters. The polls suggest enthusiasm among the Democratic base may be a factor in both states. In Michigan, 72% of Democratic-aligned registered voters say they are extremely motivated to vote, up from 58% in March, while the numbers among GOP-aligned voters remained effectively unchanged at about 7 in 10. And among registered voters in Wisconsin, 81% of Democratic-aligned voters and 70% of Republican-aligned voters say they are extremely motivated to vote. Arizona, where Trump holds a narrow lead overall, stands out in these polls as the one state where Harris appears not to have restored support among several key Democratic groups, notably Latino voters, younger voters, and white voters with college degrees. The contrast with Nevada demonstrates the difference. In Nevada, Latino likely voters break broadly toward Harris, 57% to 37%, while they are more evenly divided in Arizona, 49% Harris to 43% Trump. White voters in both states break toward Trump by double-digit margins, 56% to 39% in Arizona, 55% to 41% in Nevada. Harris carries white voters with college degrees in Nevada, 56% to 41%, while that group splits evenly, 47% each, in Arizona. Younger voters in Arizona break narrowly in Trump's favor. 48% of likely voters younger than 35 say they support Trump, compared with 42% behind Harris, a result within the margin of sampling error for that subset. In Nevada, though, likely voters in that age group divide 54% to Harris to 39% Trump, and the gender gap in Arizona appears smaller than in other states, with women splitting 48% Harris to 45% Trump while men divide 55% Trump to 41% Harris. In Nevada, Harris holds a 16-point lead among female likely voters. Among male likely voters in Nevada, Trump has an 18-point lead, 57% to 39%. These results, a narrow Trump edge in Arizona and an even race in Nevada, come even as down-ballot races in the two states suggest a more favorable climate for Democrats. Arizona's closely contested Senate race stands at 47% for Democrat Ruben Gallego with Republican Kari Lake at 44%, and a ballot measure designed to create a fundamental right to abortion in the state's constitution holds overwhelming support. 62% say they'd vote in favor of it, while 35% say they would oppose it. And in Nevada, incumbent Democratic Senator Jackie Rosen stands at 50% support to Republican Sam Brown's 40%. The findings suggest Trump may hold broader appeal in these states than elsewhere in the battlegrounds. He racks up some of his largest advantages as more trusted on handling the economy, up 16 points over Harris in Nevada and 15 points in Arizona, compared with an average 5-point lead across the other 4 states. Immigration, up 17 points in Arizona and 12 points in Nevada, up by an average of 9 points in other states. And crime and safety, up 10 points in Nevada and 9 in Arizona, up by an average of 3 points in other states. In these 2 states, and is narrowly more likely to be seen as having generally mainstream views and policies here than elsewhere. 50% in Arizona and 47% in Nevada see him that way, compared with 45% or less in the other 4 states.